we have Stacy and I are going to talk for the next half an hour on, actually Stacy's going to do most of the talking on this one because it's on the legalities of homeschooling in Texas. And while I looked it up, I didn't write it down. So I'm sure she did. And
I don't have that notebook with me, but it's okay. I remember most of it.
So she's going to talk about legalities, disenrolling, and we will put a letter up on your dashboard so that you have that letter to be able to send to the schools this afternoon. And then she's also going to talk about lingo a little bit about, we were talking earlier about unschooling. She's going to talk a little bit about that, or she can throw that over to me and I can talk about that. So take it away, Miss Stacy.
Okay. So I think the most important thing to know is that in Texas, it is legal to homeschool, as it is in every state. Just different states have different requirements. Texas is one of the easiest states to homeschool in because you are considered a private school if you homeschool in Texas. If you are withdrawing your student, there is a letter that you can look at. THSC.org has one, and HSLDA also has one, and that's the Texas Homeschool Coalition and the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. Okay, yeah. So they all have letters. Excuse me. They both have letters on their websites. So the thing about homeschooling in Texas, and I have some of my notes here. Don't ask me why I didn't get everything. Is that you have to be teaching in a bona fide manner, which means you have to actually be instructing your child in something. Whether you do that with a classical education, traditional, like just like school would do, workbooks, or unschooling, it needs to be in a bona fide manner. So that also means that you need to teach writing, arithmetic, there's 4 R's, writing, arithmetic, reading, and Judy, writing, reading, arithmetic, and good citizenship. I always forget that one because that one's kind of, that one's kind of life lessons, I think. You can teach your children what the police mean and what firemen mean and paramedics and, the different stuff like that. And you teach your child to be a good citizen. That's good citizenship. So that one's kind of easy. The other thing is that you need to teach for 180 days out of the school year. So that's just like Monday through Friday, but also in saying that, no one's coming to check your records. And so a lot of times for my kids, we used to have play practice on Fridays. And so we did 4 days of school a week because we had play practice. And so we wanted to sleep late and do what we want. So we added on to their day on Monday through Thursday in order to have that Friday off. But if you are planning on putting your child back in school after the pandemic is over and after things calm down and you feel like it would be safer health-wise for them to go back, you need to keep records of what you have taught, and and not that you have to keep a count of how many days, but you just need to, you just need to have a record of what you have taught them over this last school year. So legalities is pretty simple in Texas. Literally 180 days of school. You have to teach them reading, writing, arithmetic, and good citizenship. You also have to be teaching in a bona fide manner.
Here's what the thing says. It says the instruction must be bona fide, not a sham. Curriculum must be in visual form. So it has to be books or workbooks or a TV or a video monitor of some sort. The curriculum must include the basic subjects of reading, spelling, grammar, mathematics, and good citizenship. So reading, writing, actually it doesn't even say anything about writing, just spelling, grammar, reading, math, and good citizenship. And apparently they changed it from the 180 days. But if you are, as she mentioned, going back to a real public school situation, you're going to need to have a lot more documentation than you need to if you're just homeschooling.
So, so that's really, I mean, if you move to another state, you definitely need to check out their laws and what they require. Because some states do require that you turn in curriculum and that the kids have to test. In Texas, they do not have to do that. So that is legalities in a nutshell. I mean, it's really not that complicated for Texas. Homeschooling, you're going to hear stuff as you're researching and as you are meeting other homeschool people. You're going to hear the word co-op a lot. And co-op basically is where parents come together, they cooperate to teach a subject to a group of students. So for instance, if you have a mom who's really good at math and you really hate math, you might work out with that mom that says, hey, you know what? If you teach my kid math, I will teach your kid English. And so your kid goes to her house 1 day a week or 2 days a week, whatever, for a class, or and then vice versa, you switch. There are also co-ops that meet together in a church. Around here it's mostly in churches where they meet because you need a meeting space. And there is usually one teacher who teaches the class, and it could be a class with 3 kids up to, we've had classes that are 35 kids in a class. Some co-ops are free, some co-ops you pay for. And so it is, it's just a nice way to get somebody else or your child used to being taught by somebody else and having somebody else's expectations on your child, so that they're not just performing for you, they're performing for somebody else. And they don't usually want to let their friend's mom down. And where, mom, they really don't necessarily mind letting you down as much, as sad as that is. It's just the truth. Because moms love you, you love your kids, you're always going to forgive them. And so it's not a big deal. So the other, another thing that you're going to hear is unit studies. Unit studies are where you have taken a time period, for instance, such as we're going to go, my husband and I have been watching this show, so we're going to go with the tutor in English history. And so you do everything, your English surrounds the tutor period of the kings. Your history is about that. I don't know if you can do math about that, but the science stuff you can add about that, because they did have the sweating sickness back then, and then the plagues came in. And so you can try to add in everything about that subject. You teach all of your subjects about it. Does that make sense? Because I did not explain that well, I don't think. So, for instance, if your kid loves sharks, you can do reading on sharks. You can do math with sharks, because you can do how fast they swim, how many pounds of fish or plankton or whatever that particular shark species eats. You can do how deep they go in the water, and so that adds in math, that adds in science, and if you're doing reading about them, that adds in reading. You can make spelling words out of stuff about sharks. And so your whole study for that period of time has to do with sharks. So that gets in your reading, your writing, your arithmetic, your history, and your science. So that's kind of what unit studies are. It is one topic, you create your curriculum around that one topic. Unschooling is another one that we have been talking that you might hear about. And unschooling is the method where you kind of let your student lead you in what you want to teach or what they want to learn. You don't go with traditional, we're going to sit at this table and we are going to do math for an hour, we're going to do reading for an hour, whatever. You let the student guide you in what they want to learn. And as Allison spoke about earlier, there's going to be gaps in your schooling, but it all kind of comes out in the wash by the time they're in 12th grade if you continue homeschooling, because you will have covered a lot of the subjects. There are, like, according to Texas law, you do have to cover arithmetic, you do have to cover reading and spelling. So, you will have to have you will have to add in that, but it can still be student-led, because, for instance, again, we can go with the sharks, or we can go with, I don't know, sharks is easy. You make everything about the sharks, and you let them watch, the History Channel or the Learning Channel, or, Shark Week on Discovery. You go and you get videos from the libraries about shark, or you download stuff from the internet about sharks, you read books about sharks, so you kind of let the student guide what they are interested in, and you kind of, it's more of a hands-off approach for mom. So I will say that when you get into high school, unschooling probably will not work if they're college bound, and that's just a whole nother subject that we can talk about later. Other, let me see, do I have a list of, I don't have a list of other lingo. We've talked about co-ops. Support groups, there are homeschool support groups out in most communities. There are groups that do field trips, that have mom's night out, that do, our group here, we used to do plays, and so there are other homeschool support groups out there. You just have to search, and Facebook is a great way to search for them, because I know the kids are all on Insta and Snap and TikTok, whatever, but the moms are mostly on Facebook now. And so the support groups, a lot of, you can look for support groups and just type in homeschool support in whatever city you're in. Let's see, teaching styles is something you're probably also going to hear about. No, not really. I mean, a little bit maybe, because somebody's going to ask, oh, are you a classical education person? Yeah. Are you a traditionalist? And classical education is where you are teaching the classics. It's kind of, I don't know, kind of how to describe it. But traditional education is where they have books and worksheets and answer. Kind of goes in with unschooling, where they really don't have a whole lot of seat work to do. They have more, reading and watching videos and stuff like that. Let's see, what other kind of lingo? Judy, can you think of any others?
Yeah, the different types, unschooling, preschool. You'll hear a lot of moms that have littles that want to start homeschooling their kids, and I always tell them, hold off, because you're going to have a lot of years of homeschooling, and the best thing to do and the best way that kids that age learn is just by playing. So another one is Charlotte Mason. We have a speaker later about Charlotte Mason, and in homeschooling we call it Charlotte Mason. The rest of the world calls them Montessori, so kind of connect there. It's actually very much on the spectrum towards the unschooling section, because it's more hands-on and more student-led. So there's all kinds of, and you'll hear people go, oh, what kind of curriculum do you use? Well, I use a hodgepodge. Okay, well, that's used a lot because once you've been homeschooling for a little while, you figure out, okay, this thing works for Rebecca, but my son can't do this. And so we're going to move on to something else, or won't do this. That's another one. So, and then Allison was explaining earlier the homeschooling versus the online charter schools, because legally, we homeschooling is a different legal situation than online charter schools. So if you're going to do K-12 or connections or any of those, they're okay. They're good. I hated it, but that's because there was other things involved there. But the kids loved it because
I cheated.
my son cheated through it. He got A's 99% the whole way, which I didn't love either. But he did learn something about that, because he learned that the next year, when he didn't know the stuff from the previous year that you build upon, he had to redo it. So lesson learned there. But the online charter schools can be very helpful, especially if you're going back into school, and especially if you have a special ed designation. Sometimes moms and dads, when they pull their kids out, they worry about losing that designation number. And I am going to have a speaker on special ed. I think that's our next speaker after the break. So the lingo, it looks like, yeah, I've covered pretty much most of the lingo. The withdrawing from schools, it used to be that you would send the letter that we'll put up, certified mail, and or if you went in, you made sure you got a signature of somebody who got it from you, because you want to have a record. Because up in the North Texas area, there have been people go to court for truancy because they withdrew their children and the school never wrote it down, and they didn't have a record, and so they had to go to school. They had to go to court and prove that they're homeschooling. And you really don't ever want to do that. If ever something along those lines with legality stuff comes up, you want to contact HSLDA right away, because they can help you with that. I've never had a problem. Nobody's ever shown up on my porch, but I do know people that, especially not even homeschoolers, but have had CPS called on them. I know one lady had CPS called on them by their mother-in-law. Was that you, Stacy? Or was that somebody else? Somebody had a family member turned them into CPS because they didn't like the fact that they were homeschooling. Oh, that was Stacy. I thought it was you. So that's something that can ruin a family right there. But you have to deal with, because, and then I have a number of other friends that just have terrible neighbors and are always threatening to call CPS or something like that. And so that was one thing that I was very careful about with my kids, is I didn't let them outside, because we had a witch that lived nearby, and she would have done anything she could have. And if she'd have thought about calling CPS, she'd have done it. I didn't let my kids out to play outside until after 3 p.m. I lived in a condo complex. And so I just didn't want to deal with that. So that was something that, if you've got neighbors that are nosy and annoying and just straight up mean, you want to kind of keep an eye on that. It's not illegal, but people are just, sometimes they're just terrible people. What are you going to say, Stace?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to co-ops because I forgot about defining the co-ops, because there is a difference between an enrichment co-op and a regular co-op. An academic co-op is what we called it. I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on my throat. But an enrichment co-op is, they do that. We had a lot of those, a lot for younger kids, all the way up through high school. And it is more, you're doing it to enrich your child's schooling. You're not doing it for academic purposes necessarily. It's more for just to make them more well-rounded. An academic co-op is the extra class that they would be taking if they were, biology, for instance. They're sitting in a biology class, taking a biology class at a co-op with labs, with the teacher standing up there teaching it. And so that is a difference between the co-ops, was academic and enrichment. As they get older, you're going to hear dual enrollment as well. And that's being enrolled in high school and in college, but that's for a later session as well. So, um, so, what else, Judy, would you?
Yeah, with the co-ops, the enrichment co-ops are a lot of fun. You don't do them necessarily, most of the time those are done for elementary and junior high, because really until high school, you don't, unless you're planning on moving or going back into public school, you really don't need to keep a whole lot of records. You want, by the time your child is in 5th or 6th grade, you want them to be able to read, you want them to be able to do basic math, you want them to be able to preferably do their times tables, although mine refuse to learn theirs. And you want them to have a basic understanding of and how to write properly, how to be able to write letters and stuff like that. So there's basic things that you set for yourselves, but the enrichment co-ops, that allows you, like I have a really good friend who she loves science and she hates art. Well, I'm the opposite. I love art and I hate science. So she started a co-op, and it just grew like crazy. But we had a whole bunch of kids in there, and the parents would go in, and each of us would teach a class, anything from Legos to poetry to one year they did dissecting animals. One year somebody brought their husband in and the husband taught us Texas history. And so it was a really cool situation, but that's not something you necessarily know. I did count the dissecting for high school, but because they were in 8th grade. So that was something that we moved into that space for a while, and for a season we did the enrichment co-ops, and they were a lot of fun. The reason that we stopped was because the person who was in charge of it was ended up wanting to do something else on that day of the week, and so nobody else wanted to take it over. So that's something really you have to be aware of with co-ops, is sometimes they just fall apart because nobody wants to take it over, nobody wants to do it. With the teaching of it, we had enough moms that we were able to do, one person would teach the class, and then that person would have at least 1 or 2 helpers. And that was really good, because sometimes those homeschool kids just don't pay attention, just like regular kids, regular public school kids. And so we had helpers, and that way if something happened, somebody could run out and grab tissues or something that you're missing in the room, and you didn't have to leave the children unattended. The high school co-op that they have down in Corpus Christi, and I'm sure they have them other places, is more of a tutorial situation. It's for I think 9th grade through, oh no, sorry, 8th grade.
6th grade.
What? 8th grade?
You're talking about South Texas Homeschool Co-op?
Yeah.
6th grade through 12th grade.
6th grade.
And it is teaching. The teachers they're all certified teachers.
Yeah, and you pay the teachers in those situations,
Yeah.
because they're certified teachers and they are teaching your children, and it's not a swap like a co-op would be. Now, co-ops sometimes can cost some money, because a lot of times either the teacher has to provide all of the stuff to do, or the co-op has to have a budget to be able to bring in supplies. And so I've had a couple different ones where we paid cost on the supplies, and each teacher, when they decided to do the class, okay, if you're doing a class on art, then the teacher needs pencils, the teacher needs paper. If you're doing a class on mosaics, whatever you want to do, you need a lot more paper. So the classes don't cost the same amount. A lot of times those classes, they'll have cooking classes, and so you can go and you can learn how to make pizzas, or the little kids can learn how to make salads, that sort of thing. And those things the co-op will generally buy the stuff for, so that it's not such a burden on each individual teacher. So there is usually a little bit of a cost that goes with that sort of thing.
And rent.
And rent, yeah, sometimes you have to pay rent to the churches. Some churches will let you do it for free. Some churches want rent. Some churches insist that you have an insurance policy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that when you're looking into starting a co-op, if that's something that interests you, then you want to take those things into consideration as well. And homeschoolers are not known for huge budgets. So family budgets, because a lot of times there's one provider in the family and the other person is homeschooling. So that's something that most homeschoolers look for, the least expensive way to do something. And a lot of times co-ops really are one of the least expensive ways to do it, because you're using the resources of other parents teaching, and you don't have to pay a tutor to come and teach your child something that you don't know. You just trade the knowledge with that person.
And it's just great because it does get your child involved with other kids, and not just kids their own age, but kids of all ages. And so that's another great benefit to doing a co-op, is they get to meet friends and they get to see friends. And of course, with Corona going on, a lot of co-ops are not happening this fall that I've already heard about. Some of them, like the academic one, is going to online classes. So, so this might be a little bit of a different time with co-ops and with enrichment activities for homeschool students, just because of the pandemic. But usually, I mean, when my kids were growing up, I mean, and my kids are 29, 24, and 21. 25, he's 25.
I know, you forget when they get old, right?
Yeah, gosh. They should still be like 12, 8, and 4. But they're not. But whenever they were, we could literally be so scheduled with friend stuff and with social activities that we really had no time to homeschool. So that was something we had to be really, really careful is not schedule so many co-ops and field trips and play practices and all this stuff, because it made our school time short. Yeah. So I don't think we're going to have that problem this fall, at least.
This fall now.
Praying that is better.
For this fall, I would usually suggest that if you have 3 or 4 really close friends, that you just get together with them. Yeah. I thought of another lingo, classical conversations. Yes. Classical conversations it's kind of like a co-op, but it's also a classical education, and you have to buy the curriculum for it. But and classical, Stacey explained a little bit, but basically when you think of classical education, you think of old-fashioned, you take Latin, you take literature, that sort of thing. So it's something that's very books heavy. So the classical conversations kind of throws a little bit of Charlotte Mason in there and makes it a lot more fun, but it's still a very rigid kind of school.
Here's the definition for classical. A classical approach to homeschooling includes reading great works of literature and studying rhetoric and logic. The classical approach is based on the trivium, a method of teaching children according to the phases of a child's cognitive development, called concrete, analytical, and abstract. Classical education is primarily language-focused and literature intensive.
And that's where I started out. I love the idea of doing classical, and the idea of it was terrific. The execution of it is another story entirely. If you want to learn more about classical education, there's a really, really good book by a lady named Jessie Wise, and it's called The Well-Trained Mind. And she is pretty much considered the expert on classical education in homeschooling. And this book is this thick, and it has everything from when the kids are really little, like first grade, you start out with the rhetoric phase, then you go to the next phase, which is the logic phase, and then you go, and it's got the book is segmented into age groups, and then it has all kinds of resources and all sorts of things listed in it as well. And
another term you'll probably hear is eclectic homeschooling.
Yes.
Oh, did you talk about that, didn't you?
Well, I said hodgepodge, but eclectic.
Hodgepodge, eclectic, same thing. Just gather stuff from every place.